The moment you heard that voice,
Yeah.
just raw, aching, and so utterly unique, you knew. You knew you were listening to this uncompromising force. Today, we're really immersing ourselves in the life of Sinéad O'Connor, an artist who achieved total global mastery, really, of her craft,
Yeah.
only to immediately use that huge platform to ignite the most intense and often personally costly activism imaginable. Her art and her controversy, they were always fundamentally the same thing.
That's exactly it. That's the paradox we really need to unpack today. We've gone through the sources you provided, and our mission really is to move far past those surface headlines. We need to understand the complex journey of this singular singer-songwriter, this lifelong activist, and later, the spiritual seeker who took the name Shahada Sadaqat.
Right.
We'll explore the deep, often painful roots of her rebellion, the incredible peak of her fame, and then those profound personal struggles that ran parallel to her spiritual quest.
And just to anchor this whole discussion, we really need to grasp the sheer scale of her success before all the public drama kind of overshadowed it. Her 1990 album, I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, it was a commercial behemoth.
Oh, huge.
We're talking over 7 million copies sold worldwide. And that success was driven, of course, by that incredible universal smash, Nothing Compares to You. That single wasn't just a hit. It was actually recognized as the top world single of the year at the Billboard Music Awards.
And that level of exposure is just crucial context. She'd achieved the ultimate prize in the music business, total global acceptance, and almost immediately she started using that platform to challenge the powerful institutions that had shaped her life.
Yeah.
She reached the absolute peak, the top of the cultural mountain, but she seemed fundamentally uninterested in being, the compliant, marketable queen of that mountain.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Because to truly get a handle on that relentless rage, that refusal to conform, we absolutely have to start at the beginning. Her incredibly difficult early life. She was born Sinéad Marie Bernadette O'Connor in Dublin, 1966.
And even the naming, it sort of reflects the societal context she'd later fight against so hard. Sinéad was for Sinéad de Valera, wife of the Irish president, and Bernadette for Saint Bernadette of Lourdes.
Right.
Her father was a barrister and, quite interestingly, the chairperson of the divorce action group in Ireland. This was at a time when divorce was hugely contentious there. But the structural issues within her own family, well, they were far more devastating than the political ones.
Yeah, the sources really detailed this immense childhood trauma, which she laid completely bare in her 2021 memoir, Rememberings.
She wrote very openly about being regularly and violently beaten by her mother, often with belts, things that created lifelong scars, both physical and psychological. But there's one detail that just speaks volumes about the corrosive atmosphere she grew up in. She claimed her mother, who was, deeply rooted in that Irish Catholic culture, actively taught her how to steal, specifically stealing money from the collection plate at Mass and from charity tins.
Wow. That's a staggering contradiction, isn't it? To grow up steeped in the culture of the church, the very institution that's supposed to represent moral authority, while your parent is simultaneously forcing you to profane the sacred through theft.
Exactly.
That deep-seated sense of institutional hypocrisy, coupled with the domestic violence, it absolutely feeds directly into her later lifelong institutional rebellion.
It really creates the perfect blueprint for defiance, doesn't it? And this cycle of difficulty and, delinquency led to a major intervention when she was in her mid-teens. At 15, after sustained truancy and shoplifting, she was placed for 18 months in the Griannan Training Center in Drumcondra.
And what exactly was that facility? Because that connection to the church seems inescapable throughout her story.
It absolutely was run by the Order of Our Lady of Charity. So yeah, she was essentially incarcerated in a state-sanctioned, religious-run facility, one of the types of institutions that later became infamous for abuse scandals in Ireland. In her memoir, she describes the immense panic and terror of the punishments she faced there.
Can you elaborate a bit on that? On the severity of the controls she felt, even while she was trying to find herself musically?
Yeah, she detailed this agonizing contradiction of the place. On one hand, she was allowed to attend an outside school, and she really started to discover her talent, writing, focusing on music. She even mentioned the nuns encouraged her academics.
Okay.
But she chafed intensely under the conformity. Her description of punishment is just horrifyingly visceral, being sent to sleep in the old folks' home wing, describing the panic and terror and agony of that isolation, smelling, quote, the shit and the puke, with the old women moaning in the dark. It absolutely cemented her view of conformity as confinement and terror.
But that isolation, however difficult, it led directly to her early musical break, didn't it? Kind of a twist of fate.
It really was. While she was at Greenon, a volunteer came through who just happened to be the sister of Paul Byrne, the drummer for the prominent Irish band in Tuanua.
Ah, okay.
This woman heard O'Connor singing Barbara Streisand's Evergreen and was apparently completely captivated, and this connection led to her getting an early recording opportunity.
She was too young to actually join in Tuanua itself,
Sure
right?
thing.
But she soon formed her own band, Tum Tum Macoute, and eventually got signed to Ensign Records.
Oh.
Her debut album, The Lion and the Cobra, landed in 1987, and it was instantly seen as this critical sensation.
Yeah, it wasn't just another pop album. It was a real artistic statement. She was very vocal about the eclectic influences that shaped it, drawing from, the poetic activism of figures like Bob Dylan and Bob Marley,
Right.
fused really seamlessly with the raw, experimental, post-punk vibe of artists like Susie and the Banshees, David Bowie, The Pretenders. She basically synthesized that protest song tradition with a fiercely unique modern edge.
And even then, before she was globally famous, she was already embracing controversy. She seemed to learn early on that her voice was a weapon, even if she occasionally misfired, perhaps.
She did, yeah. She made some pretty controversial comments early on, initially defending the provisional IRA, although she quickly issued a retraction, admitting she was, quote, too young to understand the tense situation in Northern Ireland properly.
Okay.
She also took aim at the biggest band in Ireland at the time, U2, publicly calling their music bombastic. She seemed to adopt these openly political and outspoken habits, maybe reinforced by her manager then, Fachna Osile, who was known for being similarly uncompromising. She recognized, I think, that controversy was sort of tied to her artistic currency.
And that currency got a massive global injection when the 1990s arrived, which takes us right into Section 2. Peak fame meets ultimate protest, covering roughly 1990 to 1993.
Yeah, this is the moment she becomes a global icon based purely on talent, which then immediately allowed her activism to reach this critical mass. Her second album became this worldwide cultural phenomenon.
And we have to talk about her iconic visual statement, too. That trademark shaved head. It was so much more than just a style choice, wasn't it? Especially when you juxtapose it against the huge commercial success of Nothing Compares to You.
Oh, absolutely. The shaved head was a deliberate, powerful statement. In an era where female pop stars were heavily marketed based on very traditional, often sexualized views of femininity, her baldness was this defiant rejection, a rejection of the male gaze, of the industry's mold.
Yeah.
She demanded to be seen as an artist first, divorced from those conventional beauty standards, and yet this incredibly uncompromising image was completely paired with a career peak that saw her album named the year's second best by NME, a publication known for its, pretty brutal critical standards.
So she had both things, the artistic credibility and the commercial might. That combination made her conflict with the American music machine, which she seemed to actively seek out, just so spectacular.
The conflicts were pretty systematic, aren't they? Early on, she made a really clear stand against what she saw as the industry's systemic racism. She refused to perform if the U.S. national anthem was played before her concert. She specifically cited the inherent racism she perceived within the American music industry as the reason.
And the backlash for that refusal was incredibly immediate and intense, wasn't it? I remember that.
Oh, it was fierce. She was attacked in the media, called ungrateful, anti-American. And one of the most famous criticisms came from Frank Sinatra, the elder statesman of American music, who publicly threatened to physically harm her, saying he would, quote, kick her in the ass.
Wow. And she didn't stop there. She followed that up by completely rejecting the ultimate symbol of music industry validation, the Grammy Awards.
That's right. When she won the award for Best Alternative Music Performance at the 33rd Annual Grammy Awards, she refused to attend the ceremony. Instead, she wrote this open letter criticizing the entire industry structure.
What did it say?
She explicitly stated that the Recording Academy promoted materialistic values over artistic merit. She argued the Grammys were basically an engine of commercial greed rather than genuine artistic celebration.
She just refused to play by the rules, even when she was positioned to win everything.
Yeah.
But perhaps the most shocking, maybe the most intimate challenge she faced came from the writer of her biggest hit. This is where it gets really interesting, getting into the strained, maybe even dangerous relationship she had with Prince, the man who wrote Nothing Compares to You.
Yeah, according to her detailed accounts, which she only really fully revealed years later, the tension kicked off when Prince summoned her to his home. She recounts that he started kind of chastising her, acting like this authoritarian figure, criticizing her for using foul language in interviews.
And she wasn't exactly the type to tolerate a lecture.
Not at all. She reportedly told him to feck off.
Okay, and what happened next? Because the account suggests it got pretty frightening.
It escalated violently, according to her sources. She detailed that Prince suggested they have a sort of playful pillow fight, but she realized too late he'd put a hard object inside his pillowcase. He allegedly hit her repeatedly with it.
Oh my God.
She said she was forced to flee his mansion and claimed he actually chased her down the highway in his car, demanding she come back. This incident really underscores the physical danger and the immense, often toxic power structure she was up against, even in what you might think were friendly industry collaborations.
That context, the fight against the American music machine, the fight against personal intimidation and violence, it all seems to culminate in that defining moment of her career. The Saturday Night Live protest in 1992.
This single action just completely redefined her career and sealed her reputation as this radical outsider. October 3rd, 1992, she appears on SNL. Instead of performing a hit, she performs an a cappella version of Bob Marley's War.
And the choice to sing a cappella itself was significant, wasn't it?
Hugely significant. Unaccompanied by any instruments or band, it meant there was absolutely nothing to distract from the raw power of her voice or the message she was delivering.
And she didn't just sing war as written, she deliberately altered the lyrics, right? To focus on child abuse, connecting those global conflicts Marley sang about to the personal domestic terror she'd experienced.
Precisely. Then, after the performance, she reached under her shirt, pulled out a photograph of Pope John Paul II. And this wasn't just any photo. She made a point in her memoir of saying she had stolen it from her abusive mother's bedroom wall 8 years before.
Wow. So she's linking the institution of the Catholic Church directly to the private violence she experienced as a child.
Exactly. And then came the moment everyone remembers.
The tearing of the photo.
She ripped the photograph into pieces, looked straight into the camera lens, addressing, the largest possible audience, and declared, "Fight the real enemy." Then she threw the pieces down, walked off stage. NBC immediately cut to commercial. The power of that moment lies so much in its timing and context.
The historical context is just staggering. It makes her actions seem almost prophetic in retrospect.
It's absolutely essential to remember this. Her protest, connecting the Catholic Church institutionally to child abuse, happened 9 full years before Pope John Paul II publicly acknowledged the pervasive sexual abuse of children within the Catholic Church. 9 years.
Wow.
She was years ahead of the curve, speaking this incredibly inconvenient and dangerous truth that the global establishment was vehemently denying at the time.
And she paid an immediate, massive price for that prophecy, didn't she? What was the immediate fallout?
The backlash was just astronomical. NBC got hundreds of complaints right away. She faced public condemnations from figures like actor Joe Pesci, who hosted SNL the following week and threatened on air to give her a good smack.
Right, I remember that.
And pop star Madonna publicly mocked her later during an SNL appearance. Plus, just 2 weeks later, she faced this huge public humiliation when she was loudly booed off the stage at the star-studded Bob Dylan 30th anniversary tribute concert at Madison Square Garden.
That must have felt crushing, being rejected by her peers, by the public, on such a massive scale.
It was clearly designed to crush her career. But her stance never wavered. Her reflection in her 2021 memoir confirmed her conviction. She didn't regret the action. She stated clearly she felt it was far more important to be a protest singer than a pop star.
And history did eventually vindicate her, didn't it?
It did. The eventual validation came when Time magazine, years later, named her the most influential woman of 1992 precisely for that protest.
It's an incredible story of integrity just fueling sacrifice. The public, the media, the industry tried to basically erase her career for speaking the truth, only for history to fully vindicate her years later.
Which leads us nicely into her evolution after that peak. Her early life, the SNL protests, they set the stage. But the next couple of decades saw these incredible transformations, particularly in her spiritual path and her sustained activism. Let's dive into Section 3, Evolution, Spirituality, and Continuing Activism, covering the mid-1990s through about 2017.
Her musical output after the SNL controversy definitely became much more varied and commercially far less predictable.
Yeah, that unpredictable quality was obvious right away. She released Am I Not Your Girl, an album of jazz standards and torch songs. Commercially, it was a disappointment because it just didn't match the expectation of her previous, rock sound.
Right.
Then she returned with Universal Mother in 1994, which was more conventionally focused on singer-songwriter material, and it earned Grammy Music Video nominations. Later, she fully embraced reggae with Throw Down Your Arms in 2005, an album that actually did manage to achieve gold status in Ireland.
And we also see her collaborating with some major figures outside her usual sphere, like Richard Wright from Pink Floyd, and making a pretty notable final film appearance.
Yes, exactly. Her career post-SNL was really characterized more by artistic exploration than commercial calculation. In 1997, she played the Virgin Mary in Neil Jordan's dark, critically acclaimed film The Butcher Boy, a role that kind of seems fitting given her constant, very complicated engagement with Irish Catholicism.
But the primary engine, it seems, of her public life remained her uncompromising activism against the church. Even as she explored her own spirituality, she kept that confrontational stance.
Her actions in 1999 really epitomized this struggle. She was ordained as Mother Bernadette Mary by a bishop from an independent Catholic church. Now, we have to clarify, this ordination was entirely separate from and contradictory to the rules of the Roman Catholic Church, which doesn't allow female ordination.
So it was more symbolic.
Exactly. A symbolic act of finding spirituality outside the established and, in her view, corrupt structures she fought against.
But that spiritual journey didn't seem to soften her criticism, especially as the Catholic sexual abuse scandal became globally unavoidable later on.
No, not at all. In 2010, she delivered this absolutely scathing condemnation of the Vatican in an opinion piece. She labeled the organization a nest of devils and an anti-Christian office. She argued that Christ was being murdered by liars within the Vatican and called for the demolition of the papacy and the establishment of an alternative church. Her activism remained really targeted, focused entirely on institutional power, not so much theology itself.
Her political views outside of religious activism were equally complex and, frankly, often contradictory. They challenge any easy categorization.
Yeah, she was a really staunch and vocal supporter of a united Ireland. At one point, she called for the demolition of the Republic of Ireland and its replacement with a new united country, just a radical rejection of existing political structures.
And she took other international stands, too.
She did. She refused to play in Israel in 2014, making a clear protest against the treatment of Palestinians.
But then you see these really confounding statements regarding Britain.
Exactly. The contradictions are fascinating. In 2015, she made this striking comment to the BBC, expressing a wish that Ireland had actually remained under British rule because, in her view, when independence came, quote, the church took over and it was disastrous.
But then,
Yet just 1 year later, after the 2016 Brexit referendum, she celebrated the result on Facebook as freedom, noting that Ireland is officially no longer owned by Britain. She just defies simplistic political labels at every turn. It seems she often prioritized the destruction of existing authority, whether secular or religious, over maybe consistent doctrine.
this complexity seems to have paved the way for some profound identity changes later in her life. In 2017, she legally changed her name entirely.
She did. She chose the name Magda David. She explicitly stated the reason was to be free of patriarchal slave names and parental curses, symbolically cutting ties with her birth identity and all that family trauma.
And this ultimately led to her most significant spiritual transformation in 2018, didn't it?
Yes. In October 2018, she converted to Islam, adopting the name Shuhada Sadakat. She called this conversion the natural conclusion of any intelligent theologian's journey, saying she'd spent decades studying religious texts, searching for an authentic, pure faith untainted by the institutional corruption she found in Catholicism. She posted videos of herself reciting the Adhan, the Islamic call to prayer, and pictures proudly wearing a hijab.
It seemed like a beautiful story of spiritual fulfillment. But almost immediately, she generated severe public controversy again with social media posts. How do we reconcile that spiritual search with the extreme language she used then?
This is where her public persona became, well, perhaps the most volatile. In November 2018, Shuhada Sadakat posted these highly charged tweets where she called non-Muslims disgusting and mentally ill. The most widely quoted one stated, "I never want to spend time with white people again," if that's what non-Muslims are called. Not for one moment, for any reason, they are disgusting.
That's extreme language. Did she ever offer a coherent explanation for that sudden shift from spiritual fulfillment to, well, hostility?
She did, although the explanation itself kind of speaks to her volatile relationship with fame and digital life. She offered this remarkable, if slightly strange, retraction and apology in 2019. She claimed those statements were not true at the time and they are not true now. She attributed them to being triggered as a result of Islamophobia dumped on me.
Okay.
But crucially, she claimed the entire point of the controversial, offensive tweets was actually an attempt to force Twitter to close her account. She felt overwhelmed and abused on the platform, and she believed only using extreme language would achieve that goal.
It really illustrates the immense pressure she must have been under, resorting to what sounds like a self-cancellation attempt just to find some peace. This level of intense public scrutiny and internal turmoil leads us directly into Section 4, the deeply personal battles with health and family that really consumed her later years.
And she was incredibly transparent about these struggles, which aligns with her long-standing desire to use her platform for honest communication, especially around destigmatizing mental illness.
What were the specific health struggles she talked openly about?
The list is pretty extensive. She openly discussed suffering from fibromyalgia, which caused significant chronic pain and fatigue. That actually forced her to take a break from music between 2003 and 2005.
Right.
She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder after a suicide attempt on her 33rd birthday back in 1999. And she was also later diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, and borderline personality disorder, or BPD.
Could you maybe briefly explain what borderline personality disorder involves for listeners, since she was so open about it?
Sure. BPD, as she likely experienced it, is often characterized by chronic instability in moods, in relationships, in self-image. It often leads to intense emotional swings and a deep fear of abandonment. Given her childhood trauma, BPD and complex PTSD were likely direct results of those really foundational experiences. By openly discussing these specific, often highly stigmatized diagnoses, she was really following through on her commitment to honesty.
And she actively sought to use that honesty to help others, didn't she? Her appearance on the Dr. Phil show in 2017 seems like a key example.
Yes, absolutely. She stated her goal on that show was specifically to destigmatize mental illness. She also made a point of expressing immense gratitude for the help she'd received, specifically thanking St. Patrick's University Hospital in Dublin. She called it her second home, noting she'd spent much of the previous 6 years there and that, frankly, without their help, she wouldn't be alive.
And while she was fighting these intense internal battles, her personal life remained pretty turbulent. We should probably touch on the complexity of her marriages and family.
Yeah, her personal life was often quite volatile, perhaps reflecting the instability linked to her diagnoses. She was married 4 times and had 4 children by 4 different fathers. Her marriages were sometimes extraordinarily brief, which often became, media fodder.
Like the last one.
Exactly. Her 4th marriage, to therapist Barry Harridge, was particularly short-lived. They got married in Las Vegas, and it officially ended after they had, quote, lived together for 7 days only, although they did attempt a brief reunion afterward.
But the profound tragedy that struck late in her life, the death of her son Shane, must have been just utterly devastating for her.
It really seems like it was the deepest pain of her life. Her son Shane, who was only 17, died by suicide in January 2022. She had actually lost custody of him almost a decade earlier, back in 2013, and tragically, he had recently been placed on suicide watch at a hospital before apparently leaving the facility.
And her response was immediate and focused on accountability, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Echoing her lifelong activism against institutions.
Yes, the loss was clearly shattering, and she immediately criticized the Health Service Executive, the HSE, that's the Public Health Authority in Ireland, for what she saw as their failings in handling his case and protecting him. Just a week after his death, she very openly admitted herself to a hospital to get help for her own renewed mental health struggles, which understandably led to her canceling all subsequent musical activities.
Which brings us finally to Section 5, her final work and enduring legacy. Despite all the immense personal upheaval and tragedy, she still managed to produce some really vital work right up until the end.
Her best-selling memoir, Rememberings, came out in 2021 to significant critical acclaim. She had also announced what was intended to be her final album, titled No Veteran Dies Alone. Although that album was indefinitely postponed after Shane's death, her producer confirmed that the work was emotionally raw, intensely personal, and almost complete, apparently just missing one song.
And there was one final, incredibly poignant piece of music released posthumously, wasn't there? Something that connected her final work directly back to her lifelong fight against institutional cruelty in Ireland.
That would be the Magdalene song. It was released posthumously in 2023 for the TV drama The Woman in the Wall. That drama focused on the Irish Magdalene laundries, those institutions of forced labor for so-called fallen women, often run by religious orders, which just epitomized the abuse of power she had railed against her entire career.
Wow.
Apparently, she provided the song shortly before her death, making it a really powerful final artistic statement.
She moved to a flat in London in early 2023, didn't she? Saying she wanted to feel less lonely and was trying to finish her album before her death in July 2023 at the age of 56.
That's right. The official cause of death was later confirmed by the coroner to be natural causes. Specifically, the findings pointed to an exacerbation of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and bronchial asthma.
Her funeral procession in Bray, near Dublin, saw this massive, emotional public outpouring. Thousands gathered to pay respects, which really demonstrated that the public had, in many ways, ultimately reconciled with her complexity. The tributes that followed her death were particularly telling, especially about the music industry.
They really were, especially the critique from English singer Morrissey. He specifically called out executives and celebrities for what he saw as their hypocrisy, accusing them of not having the courage to support her radical integrity when she was alive. He said very bluntly, "You praise her now only because it is too late."
Ouch. But perhaps the most powerful and fitting tribute came at the 66th Annual Grammy Awards in 2024, honoring her artistic legacy on the very stage she had rejected decades before.
That was Scottish singer and activist Annie Lennox performing Nothing Compares to You during the In Memoriam segment. It was a really stunning homage. Lennox performed with a single tear painted on her cheek, a direct reference to O'Connor's famous music video.
And most critically, Lennox really channeled O'Connor's fiery political spirit right to the very end of the performance, didn't she?
She absolutely did. She used the closing moments to call for a ceasefire in the Gaza war and for peace in the world, a direct and potent translation of O'Connor's outspoken political mission decades later, right there on the industry's biggest stage.
Incredible.
She was also recognized in 2024 with a posthumous nomination for induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And in a kind of strange reflection of how she became integrated into the culture she once fought, a Bratz doll was even created in her likeness to commemorate Women's History Month. The ultimate rebel became this symbol of established, if maybe belated, recognition.
So if we try to synthesize all this immense complexity, her journey really demonstrates the incredibly high price paid by artists who possess that true integrity, the ones who really refuse to just play the game and, shut up and sing.
Yeah, her story tells us that her personal life, her radical activism, her spiritual quest from Catholicism to her own ordination to converting to Islam, it was all part of this inseparable search for authentic expression. She was constantly searching for integrity, for institutional truth, sometimes clearly at the expense of her own personal stability and commercial longevity.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, thinking about this? Fundamentally, she was someone who challenged core, powerful institutions. The Vatican, the music industry, the state, the norms of acceptable femininity, long before those challenges were globally acknowledged as necessary and valid. The depth of her commercial sacrifice, starting right there with tearing up that photo on live television, that was the fuel for her integrity. She really defined for a generation what it meant to be an uncompromising artist.
We've explored her life through her many profound identities: Sinéad O'Connor, Mother Bernadette Mary, Magda David, and finally Shuhada Sadakat. Now, here's a thought maybe for your own reflection. How does the public ultimately remember and even revere an artist whose entire life seemed dedicated to tearing up the symbols of authority, yet who ended up revered, often posthumously, by the very establishment she spent decades fighting? What does that whole process say about the relationship between radical rebellion and eventual, perhaps inevitable, recognition?